As I sat down to work on this week's sermon, I wondered how many of us found open windows in our lives this past week. Windows opened so that we might see the grace of God in others, or reveal the grace that is within each of us. I looked around for my own open windows, and at first, amidst the craziness of a very, very hectic week, I struggled to see them. For me, it was hard to see what's out there when I'm focusing on what's right here, what's right in front of me. I don't think I'm the only one that has that problem. Certainly, some in the early days of Christianity struggled with this too. While Paul preached a message of grace revealed through faith, others insist upon works of the law to reveal the grace and blessings of God, believing that the path of righteousness was one they could walk with confidence, knowing that they had been chosen by God to walk the path that God had prepared just for them. They also believed those who could not or would not walk the same path as they did were condemned by their own actions. For first century Jews, the law was the path to righteousness. Do what it says, and God will bless you. Be faithful to God, and God will be faithful to you. At least that's how they understood the promises God made them. But over the centuries, all under the auspice of trying to live even more faithful lives, they had taken straightforward commandments and further defined them as they thought best, so that everyone would know exactly what was needed to live in accordance with the law. Instead of living in accordance with the law because they were holy, living in accordance with the law was perceived to be what made them holy. And holiness, righteousness, became less about God's grace and all about something they controlled. And if they controlled it, then they had the power and authority to say who was and was not holy and righteous. And if they were to be judged, this meant that they, not God, would then decide the penalty for one's failure to live a holy and righteous life in accordance with the law. These penalties, these acts of contrition, were added to the law. And before long, a law that was intended to help us maintain our relationship with God and one another became the means by which people were controlled and manipulated. This is why Paul is so adamant in his message that it is God, not the law, that makes us holy. Over and over, Paul tells his listeners that nothing they do, nothing we do, no penalty paid, can wipe away the effects of sin in our lives. Sure, we can make restitution, we can make amends, but the damage once done cannot be undone, at least not by our actions alone. Paul says only God is able to do this, and that it is through Jesus Christ, not compliance with the law, that we find ourselves justified, freed from that ultimate penalty that awaits us, and thereby restored to holiness. In chapter 3 of his letter to the Romans, Paul describes the freedom and restoration offered through Christ as God's atoning sacrifice. And since all sin and fall short of the glory of God, nothing we do can cleanse us of our sin in the way that Jesus does through the cross. That's one reason Martin Luther led the way to the abolishing of indulgences in the Roman Catholic Church. Like Jewish sacrifices, works of the law, indulgences led one to the conclusion that righteousness could be bought, even earned through our deeds, instead of seeing that our holiness is given to us out of the grace and love of God. Once we understand this, it's so much easier for us to change our focus from what is right in front of us to what's out there. Heads down, we can't see what we can see when our heads are up. Take, for instance, the Pharisee in today's gospel. He was learned in the law. This means he knew what it took, in accordance with the law, to be righteous. And knowing this, he knew that the woman at Jesus' feet was anything but. He was so focused on her sins, he couldn't see the sin in his own life. He couldn't see the sin in his own life. So Jesus helps him lift his head and see what God sees. The goodness in each of us. Goodness that comes from allowing the grace of God to work in and through us. And not just us, but in and through even those we judge as beyond hope. But Jesus makes clear, and what Paul reminds us throughout his letters, is that there is no one beyond hope. There is no one unworthy of God's grace. This weekend, youth from our parish are going to join youth and adults from across the diocese to share the grace of God they have come to know in their own lives, and to experience the grace of God as it is revealed through those they will serve, both in Valentine and on the reservation, and through their fellow team members. Just as grace is going to be there for them, it's here for us. When we encounter it, we find ourselves strengthened and rejuvenated because we are reminded that we are not alone. God is with us always. Not just here in our hearts, but in the hearts of all those we encounter along the paths we walk. But this is our measure. The lens we look at our journey through life with, it's not that hard to see that we pass by numerous open windows each week, each day of our lives. The good news is, just because we've walked past them doesn't mean we can't go back and relish the joy and the hope they offer us. I know that when I did this week, I realized that even though I hadn't felt it, I was surrounded by grace. Not only in the things I did, whether big or small, but into things that just happen. And I found that in that happening, that being present, I had helped others to know that grace too. My prayer is that each of our youth going on this mission trip, each member of our parish, each person we encounter along the way is able to do likewise. And by sharing and experiencing the grace of God, we can both know and show the extent of God's love for us in a way that is unimaginable. A way that opens windows in our lives and the lives of others, thereby revealing even more grace. Grace given not just to fill our lives, but the lives of all those